beginning the recording. Our daf today is Daf Samach, and we're going to start from Daf Nun Tes Amud Sheni, the last word, V'loi V'harei Truma Sadeshen. So let us briefly review, just for us, where we're holding. What we learned so far in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that they would pour the blood down the yesod, and in the yesod, let's just get a picture up here. Okay, let's get Steve here. Right over here, there was like a drain. Hi, Steve. We just started. Okay, in the yesod, there was a drain, and this drain would lead out to like a sewer system in the Beis Hamikdash. There was like a sewer system, and that led out the blood into the outside the Beis Hamikdash. And they would actually sell the blood. There was nothing that went to waste over here. And that money had to be paid by gardeners who would use the blood from the carbonos, and they would use it as fertilizer. So our Mishnah says that if a gardener doesn't pay for it, he uses it, not only is he stealing from Hegdash. And that's called Me'ila. And, if it was a Me'ila da'oraisa, that you're stealing from Hegdash da'oraisa, then when you want to do tshuva and pay back Hegdash, you'd have to pay 20% more, right? But that's called chaimish, and also have to bring a carbon. But the Gemara established that the fact that our Mishnah says it's Me'ila, it doesn't mean it's da'oraisa. It means you only get Me'ila d'Rabbanan. It's only d'Rabbanan. Blood cannot be a problem midoraisa. And the Gemara brought a pasuk, and they had three miutim in the pasuk. Lechem, lechaper, hu. Let's just bring up what that pasuk looks like in a moment. Hold on. Sorry. Yeah. The pasuk says, the Torah tells you not to eat blood, right? If you eat blood, you get kares. And then the Chumash says, ki nefesh habasa badamhi, it's blood. And Hashem says, v'ani nisativ lechem al mizbeach, blood is only for the mizbeach, lechaper, to bring forgiveness. So three miutim, it says three exclusions to teach you that it's yours, and it remains unhegdish. It's only for a kapara. And therefore, the Gemara used this three miutim to tell you that with the blood, there is no me'ila medairaisa. It's not me'ila medairaisa. It doesn't really have such a kedusha to it. And the Gemara gives a simple, the last word is that it can't be that you spray blood on the mizbeach and you get me'ila with it. Because once you spray it on the mizbeach, the mitzvah is done. So how could there be a me'ila? There's no such a thing that you did a mitzvah and you get me'ila with it. So that's the Gemara's conclusion, that blood, after it's sprayed on the mizbeach, blood, even before you spray it on the mizbeach, also does not have me'ila. And that's based on the fact that there cannot be something that the mitzvah was done and you get me'ila. So the Gemara says, V'loi, is that true? The Gemara counters that. V'harei truma sadeshen. The truma sadeshen, we're aware that you're supposed to take a little bit ashes off the mizbeach and put it on the side of the mizbeach. Right? Every day you took a little bit of ashes off the mizbeach and put it on the side. And you have to, the Torah says, v'samai eitzel mizbeach, Rashi says. You can see it. You should put it next to the mizbeach. What does it mean? The ton geniza. You have to leave it there. So we see from there it's aser bahanot. You're not allowed to benefit. If they want to sell those ashes, they can't. So we see that since it's aser to benefit from it because of its kedusha, so it must be it have a kedusha to it, even though the mitzvah is done. When you put the ashes over there, the mitzvah is done. And nevertheless, there's me'ila. So we find a concept that even though you did the mitzvah, there is a me'ila. So let us say the same thing by blood. That even after you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, the blood should have the din me'ila on it. So here we go to Samach Amar Aleph. The Gemara says, so the answer is no. Because Mishum dahave truma sadeshin ubigdei kahuna. Shnei kesuvim abayim ke'echad. L'chol shnei kesuvim abayim ke'echad ein melamdin. Because you're right. Truma sadeshin, after the mitzvah is done, there is Me'ilah. And there's also another thing that after the mitzvah is done is the clothing of the Kohen Gadol that he wore on Yom Kippur. The Torah says that after the Kohen Gadol wears this clothing on Yom Kippur, the nicham sham, he should put it away. And it's mashma that no one can ever benefit from that big day kahuna. So even though the Kohen Gadol is finished with the mitzvah of those white clothing, right, the white clothing, and the mitzvah is done, nevertheless, if someone would steal it, he would be chayav me'ilah, even though the mitzvah is done. So you have two ideas teaching you the same thing. Trumas Hadeshen, a big day kahuna, teaching you that even after you did the mitzvah, you chayav me'ilah. So that is the exception to the rule, because when you have two psukim that teach you the same idea, those are the exceptions to the rule. The rule is that if the mitzvah is done, there is no me'ilah. But Trumas Hadeshen, a big day kahuna, are two psukim that teach you the same idea, and they are the exceptions that there is me'ilah after you did the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, this teretz, your answer is good according to Rabbanan. The Omri, they say that the big day kahuna, after the Kohen Gadol used it, is v'hinicham sham. He has to leave it there, right? He puts it there and nobody can use it. Malamich tuning geniza. Rabbanan say that Kohen Gadol's clothing, you have to put it away. You can't use it again. Ella Rabbi Daisa, according to Rabbi Daisa, the Amma big day kahuna ru'uyin hein lekohen hedyed. Rabbi Daisa said that big day kahuna is worthy for a kohen hedyed. That means the Kohen Gadol could take it off, and another kohen could wear it every day. It doesn't really have any kedusha to it. That never even has kedusha while it's even by a kohen hedyed. Clothing cannot have a me'ilah to it, as Rashi explains, because clothing in general, after you finish the service, take a typical day's kohen. He finishes the service. Now he's going on his way to the locker room. So you're going to tell me he has me'ilah because he's benefiting from Hegdish not doing the service? So there is no such a thing of me'ilah by kohen, by clothing of a kohen. So therefore, my ikalamemer. In other words, you only have one exception to the rule, Trumas Hadeshen. What are you going to answer? How are you going to answer the teretz? Because you still need to find, in order to be exceptions, you have to have two exceptions to the rule. And you only have one because you can knock out big day kahuna. So the Gemara says, I have another exception to the rule, which is very similar to Trumas Hadeshen. Because Mishum Nahave Trumas Hadeshen is one. The Egla Arufa, and Egla Arufa is the little calf. The calf is brought to let's say they found a dead body on the road in between two cities. They measure which city is closest to the dead body, and they don't know who killed this person. So because they don't know this, they killed this person. The Chumash says that city has to bring an egla arufa, which means they take a calf to a nachal or esan, which according to some of Farshim means to a hard ground over a hard valley, and they decapitate the egla's head. They decapitate that calf's head, and they wash their hands, and they say, the Bezin washes their hands, and they say, we did not spill the blood of this person that died. That's egla arufa. But after you decapitate that calf, the Torah says, you leave it there, and that's it. It should be buried, and it's osir bahana, even though the mitzvah is done. Once you knock off the head off the animal, the mitzvah is done, and yet the Torah says you can't use it. It's osir bahana. So those things, even we find two things. After you did the mitzvah, there's still me'ilah. Shnei ksuvim haboim ke'echad. Chol shnei ksuvim haboim ke'echad ein melamdim. You have two psukim that teach you the same idea. They're the exception. They don't teach the rule. The rule is that after you did the mitzvah, there is no me'ilah. There is no kedusha to it. So that's why blood has no kedusha. So the Gemara says, that would be good according to the opinion that says if you have two psukim, then they're the exception to the rule. According to another opinion, you need to have three exceptions, three teachings of the same idea for those three to become the exception to the rule. You actually need three examples. And here, you're telling me you only have two examples, Trumas Hadeshen, Egla Rufa. So the Gemara says, you're right, but even if you hold that you need three, normally you need three teachings of the same idea, but here, everybody would agree that Egla Rufa and Trumas Hadeshen are the exception, and the rule is different, because Trei Mi'utik Sivi, there's special mi'utim, special limitations that was said, specifically extra words that was said by Trumas Adeshin, v'samoy, it, and ha'arufa means only the arufa. So there's extra limitations that were said by these two mitzvahs to teach you that they are really the exception to the rule. Normally, after you do a mitzvah, there is no me'ilah. There is no me'ilah. It's only Trumas Hadeshin and Egla Rupa, the exception, and there is actually a limit. The Torah adds extra words to teach you that don't apply this rule by anywhere else. So therefore, where do we conclude? Right over here, we conclude that blood, there is no me'ilah by blood. Blood really has no kedusha. It's part of the animal, but if someone would steal it, he's not mechayev me'ilah, only drabana. So the Gemara says, okay, V'hani tlasi kra badam lameli. Why do we need 3 psukim to teach you the same idea that blood does not have me'ilah to it? As we said yesterday, that we have three mi'utim in the pasuk. 1, he, lachem, 2, lechaper, to teach you that blood has no me'ilah to it. It's not kedushadik, and therefore there's no me'ilah. Why do you need 3 psukim to teach you the same idea? So the Gemara says, really, only you need one pasuk to teach you that idea. But chad, one is to teach you lamute minoisar, that if let's say you have an animal that's left over, like a carbon pesach that was left over, okay? It's left over in the morning. So the whole animal is noisar. What would happen if someone didn't know and eats the blood of this animal? So since the blood would not be considered noisar, he would only be chayiv 1 carbon. Let's say he did it by mistake, so he's chayiv a carbon chatas for eating noisar. But he's not chayiv a carbon for eating blood, because he's chayiv 1 carbon for eating blood, but not chayiv a carbon for eating noisar, because dam, the blood of the animal, never becomes noisar. It's only the flesh, the meat of the animal, that has a din noisar. But the blood just has the isser of blood, it doesn't have the isser of noisar. The one teaches you that blood does not have the isser of me'ilah on it, as we discussed. That if someone would eat blood and he has tumas haguf, let's say he touched the sherets and now his body is tamei. If he would eat the meat of a carbon, he'd be chayiv kares. If he would eat the blood of the animal that was slaughtered, then he wouldn't be chayiv kares, especially if he didn't know that there's no issa to eat blood. Let's say he thought there is no issa to eat blood. The fact that he ate a kachim animal's blood would not be mechayiv in kares, although he's tamei, because the tuma of the isser of eating kachim meat when you're tamei only applies to the meat itself, but does not apply to the blood. That's why you need 3 miyutim. But aval mepigol, the Gemara says, but let's say the carbon was pigol. Now we know that if you shechted a carbon and thinking that I'm going to eat it in a week's time, in your mind, as you're slaughtering it, you're thinking that you can eat it much later than you're allowed to. So then that automatically passes the carbon and it's pigul. So there, the Gemara says, Lo tzarach la ma'ute kra. You don't even need the Torah to tell you that the blood does not apply. If you eat the blood of a pigul carbon, it's certainly you're not eating pigul, because the name of pigul doesn't go on to the blood. Why not? It's now we learned in the Mishnah. Kol sheyesh le matirin. What is pigul? Is if it becomes permitted onto the mizbeach. In other words, or permitted that you can eat it. There are 2 things on an animal. When you shech the carbon, some of it goes on to the mizbeach, and some of it is eaten by human consumption, right? Like a shlamim. Part of it goes on the mizbeach, part of it is eaten by the person that brought the carbon. Or a chatas, part of it goes on the mizbeach, part of it is eaten by the kahanim. So if they are on the meats and the part that goes on the mizbeach, they are chayav and alei mishum pigul. Those things get pigul because they become mutter after the sprinkling of the blood, which is the matir. Then you put the carbon on the mizbeach, and the person is allowed to eat the carbon, right? So those things on those meats and those insides that are brought on the mizbeach, those parts of the animal, the name pigul applies. But the dam atzmei matir, but the blood itself, pigul does not apply onto the blood itself, because that permits others, but nothing is permitting it. In other words, that blood is never eaten. So therefore, we learn from Sukkim that from other places that dam does not apply the name of pigul does not apply to the blood. Pigul could happen onto the carbon itself, where if someone would eat a pigul carbon, the meat of a pigul carbon, he'd chayiv kares. But if you eat the blood of a pigul carbon, and if you ate it by accident, so you get an avera for eating blood, but you do not get an avera for eating pigul, because it doesn't. The name pigul doesn't apply to the blood. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah is again, it's very hard to imagine such a scenario that the Kohen Gadol could mess up on Yom Kippur. But always, as we said before, that wherever there is kedusha, big high kedusha, the Satan comes in and tries to frustrate matters, and this is the subject of the whole week. And so the Mishnah says, "Kol ma'aseh Yom Kippurim ha'omer." Anything that I told you on the service of Yom Kippur, that you're supposed to sprinkle into the Kodesh Kedoshim, and you're supposed to sprinkle on the Parochos, and you're supposed to sprinkle on the Mizbeach, al haseder. You have to do it in order, which means, which generally comes first. The one that comes first is you sprinkle the cow's blood first, and then the goat's blood first, then the goat's blood second. You do that in the Kodesh Kedoshim. You do that on the Parochos, and you mix it, by the way, when you go to the Mizbeach. But if you preceded one to the other, which is le'asel klum, you didn't do anything, and you have to redo it. For example, this is the example the Mishnah gives. Higdim dam hasoir, higdim dam hasoir ledam hapar. Guy, the Kohen Gadol, by accident, he's in the Kodesh Kedoshim. Imagine the Kohen Gadol is in Kodesh Kedoshim. He's supposed to sprinkle first the blood of the par, and then put the so'ir. But he put the goat's blood first, and then the par's blood first, second. So we tell the Kohen, Yachsa v'yazar b'dam haso'ir la'acha dam hapar. He should go out, he should redo it again, and first sprinkle the par, and then do the so'ir again, do the goat's blood again, because the first time you did it doesn't count. Then, the Mishnah says like this, imagine this, imagine the Kohen Gadol, and he's klutzy a little bit. Let's say you're supposed to sprinkle achas lamala, sheven lamata, right? He has 8 sprinklings to be done in front of the Kodesh Kedoshim. So let's say he's dealing with the par, and he only sprinkled 4 of them. And nishbach hadam, the blood spilled all over the floor, and now he has no blood to continue to spilling. So yavi dam acher, the yachsa betchila b'fnem, unbelievable. He has to walk out of the Kodesh Kedoshim. Imagine he walks out and says, "I'm sorry, I messed up. I spilled the blood all over the floor in the Kodesh Kedoshim," and they have to reshecht another part, another cow. They have to reshecht and start from the beginning. Now, the chein behechal. If this happened in the hechal, for example, he's supposed to sprinkle 8 on the curtain, and he sprinkled 4. So then it spilled. He has to go out reshecht, but he doesn't have to go back into the Kodesh Kedoshim to start again. He could go just start from where he was up to, which was on the curtain by the Parochos, because he already completed the service in the Kodesh Kedoshim. And same thing, if the blood spilled out by the gold mizbeach, he could just have to reshech and just sprinkle on the gold mizbeach, but he does not have to go into the Kodesh Kedoshim. He does not have to go back to the Parochos. Shekulam kapara b'fnei atzman. All of these things are separate services. The service in the Kodesh Kedoshim is one service. The service in the Parochos is another service, and the service by the gold mizbeach is a third service. But they're not related, which is a leniency and a chumrah. The leniency is that if you spill the blood, let's say by the mizbeach hazav, you don't have to redo the Kodesh Kedoshim, and you don't have to redo the Parochos. You just shecht it and just do the mizbeach hazav again. But the stringency is that if you're holding in middle of the sprinkling, let's say you're supposed to sprinkle 8, and you sprinkled 4, and then the blood spilled out. Then when you shecht again, a new carbon, the new par, you have to start from number 1 again. You can't just do 4 more and then have the 8. No, you have to redo 1 through 8 again. But Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon are more lenient. From the place that you stopped, that's when you begin again. So which means that if he did 4, so when he shechts and then the blood spilled out, when you shecht again, start from number 4. That's it. So that's the end of the Mishnah. Tana Rabbana, the Gemara talks about. Now, here we have to know, very simple. There are 3 types of service that the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur. Okay, there's one type of service that he does in the Kodesh Kodashim wearing the white clothing, right? Then there's another type of service that he does in the Heichal, right, the sanctuary outside by the Pareches and by the Mizbach HaZahav. He does that also wearing white clothing. That's called the Heichal service. That's called the outside the Kodesh Kodashim. And then there's a third type of service that he does, which is in the gold clothing. The gold clothing, he's wearing gold clothing. He brings the ayel and the ayel ha'am during that day. So there's services that are done wearing the white clothing, wearing the gold clothing, and so even with the white clothing, there are two types of service: one in the Heichal and one in the Kodesh Kodashim. So when the Mishnah just started saying that Yom Kippur service has to be done al haseder, and if you mess up the order, you have to restart it again. So the Mishnah seems to imply that all services done that day have to be done in that precise order. Even services that are done with the gold clothing, the normal oilers, if he did one with the wrong order, he has to redo the whole service. So that was our Mishnah said. But Taner Rabbanan, the Brisa said, Kol Maaseh Yom HaKippurim Ha'amar, all the order of the service on Yom Kippur, al haseder has to be done in a specific order. In Higdim Maasa Lachaveri, Le'asa Klub. If you preceded something that was supposed to be done after its friend, then the thing that you preceded it by accident is as if you didn't do anything. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Emasai. Rabbi Yehuda limits this. When was this only said? B'dvarim hanasim b'vigdei lavan mibifnim. Only services done with the white clothing, mibifnim, in the Kodesh Kodashim. So the only service that's done in the Kodesh Kodashim is three services. One, Ketoras. The next thing is the blood of the par. The next thing is the blood of the Sa'ir. So if he, for example, preceded the Sa'ir before the par, then you say that's invalid. You have to do the par, the cow, before the Sa'ir. Aval, b'dvarim hanasem b'bigdei lavan b'bechutz, but things that are done on the outside of the Kodesh Kodashim, let's say in the Heichal, where you sprinkle onto the Mizbeach, or you sprinkle onto the Pareiches, or doing the lotteries, or saying vidui, or pouring the extra blood onto the Mizbeach on the outside, although he's wearing his white clothing, if you did it out of order, that's okay. So if the Kohen Gadol somehow sprinkled on the Mizbeach Hazav, and then, or let's say you're sprinkling on the curtain and did the Sa'ir before the par, that's okay. It only applies, this din of doing it in order only applies in the Kodesh Kodashim. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. If you did it earlier on the outside, it's okay. So that's how Rabbi Yehuda limits this stringency that has to be done in order only applies for services done in the Kodesh Kodashim. Rabbi Nechemia doesn't make, as long as it's done with the white clothing, whether you're doing the service in the Kodesh Kodashim, whether you're doing outside the Kodesh Kodashim, always it has to be done in order. But what is the leniency? Rabbi Nechemia is more strict. Items, part of the Yom Kippur service that was done in his gold clothing on the outside of the sanctuary, let's say in the Azara, he's shechting. What service is done? He brings a ram, and the ram of the people, 2 rams he brought for an oila. If he let's say he's supposed to take out the kafel machta, he's supposed to go back into the Kodesh Kodashim and take out the spoon and shovel that he left there. If he did that before he did the ram service, that's okay. Masha Asu, that's okay. It's okay. So the only limitation that he's the leniency is only services that are done with the gold clothing. Services that are done with the white clothing, they have to be done in precise order. And if you preceded one service before the other, you discount it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Mikra Echadarshu. Both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia found one pasuk that tells you it has to be in order. And they were learning this pasuk. In Chumash, where on the Yom Kippur service, it says, it has to be in order. L'chuka means you have to take it strict order. Achas b'shana, the service that's done once a year. So from this pasuk you learn it has to be done precise order. But now, what was the pasuk talking about? So we go to Amud Beis, Samach Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Sava, Rabbi Yehuda says that what the Torah is telling you, that the strictness that has to be done in a precise order only applies to the place where you're actually bringing atonement one time a year. What is the only place in the base of Mikdash that you appear one time a year? That's in the Kodesh Kodashim. Only there order is essential. But other than that, you can mess up the order and it'll still be kosher. So he learns that the pasuk is only talking about makon. Rav Nechemia Sava, no, what the Torah says, services that you do one time a year with wearing a different type of clothing, that order applies. So Rav Nechemia Sava, Dvarim hamaschaprim behem parachas b'shana, the things that the services that you're doing to bring atonement one time a year, that's where the order applies. So therefore, Rabbi Nechemia has a more stricter view than Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nechemia says that the order is important, is not only in the Kodesh Kodashim, that any time the Kohen Gadol wears his white clothing, he has to do it in precise order, and if he messes it up, he has to redo it. So the Gemara says, how does Rabbi Yehuda see the word that it only applies to the service in the Kodesh Kodashim? The Gemara asks, Rabbi Yehuda, does the pasuk say that order applies only in the place that you're there once a year? So how did Rabbi Yehuda see that in the pasuk? Ella hainu taimid Rabbi Yehuda. This is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's go back to the pasuk. The pasuk says, let's go just to peek at the pasuk. The pasuk says that order is important. Achas b'shana. Once a year, the order is important. So we're going to darshan. There are two extra words, zois, right? That's one, and there's another word over here that says achas. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that order is important, but the Torah limits it. The Torah gives you two miyutim, two limitations. Ksiv zois uksiv achas. It says this and once. Chad, one tells you it limits it. Order is important, except lamute big day love except when you're doing the white clothing service outside the Kodesh Kodashim. The Chad and one is telling you that order is not important. Lamute big day zahav, when you're doing the service with the gold clothing, that is when order is not important. That's how Rabbi Yehuda is going to really learn pasuk. Rabbi Nechemia is going to say that you're right. I agree with you. You have two exceptions. That order is not important, but I'm saying it differently. Chad lamute big day zahav. One is telling you that when it comes to big day zahav, order is not important. And the chad lemaute shirayim deloy me'akvi, that pouring the blood down the yesod is not important. So even though when the Kohen Gadol leaves the sanctuary, he comes out over here and pours blood down the yesod. But if he went ahead and shechted the ayal before he did that, that's when order is not important. So pouring blood down the drain is the least important. And there, I would agree to you that order is not important. So according to Rabbi Nechemia, he's dividing it. Most of the services, in fact, almost all the services that the Kohen Gadol does with his white clothing outside the Kodesh Kodashim, order is important, except one service that he does with the white clothing on the outside. That's pouring the blood down the drain, the extra blood down the drain. There, if you do it in any which order, it's fine. So he splits an atom over here. Rabbi Yehuda will tell you, Ima Akvi, if you hold that spilling the blood is very important, right? And spilling the blood down the drain is an avoida, it's an important service, then Ma'akvi. Then if you hold that it's an important service, and then you hold that order is important, then it should hold order is important by all white clothing service. Be'i loy ma'akvi, if you hold that the service of shirayim, of pouring the blood, is not important, then loy ma'akvi, then the other white clothing services are not important. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is trying to point out to Rabbi Nechemia, you cannot divide the white clothing service and say that the white clothing service that's pouring just blood down the drain is not important and the others are important. they're all important. So, but my limitation makes sense. My limitation says Rabbi Yehuda, the order is important in the Kodesh Kodashim. Outside the Kodesh Kodashim, order is not important. You, Rab Nechemia, say that order is important by everything except this spilling of the blood down the drain. That I cannot accept that opinion. Kidditanya, because we learned other places that Rabbi Yehuda was understood, and Rabbi Yehuda's understanding that it's a very important service of pouring the blood down the drain. It's not just getting rid of the blood. It's like a service for itself. Kidditanya, we learned in the Brisa, Bechila mikaper as a kodesh. The Torah says when he finishes doing the service in the kodesh, kadashim, then he goes and shechs the seir achatas, or he sends away the goat to be thrown to Azazel. That's what the Torah says. When he finishes this doing the services of the kodesh kadashim, then he goes to the seir hazazel and sends it off to be thrown off the mountain. What does the Torah says? V'chila mekapi. He finished from bringing kapara. It's extra. So Rabbi Akiva said in Kippur, if he did the service of bringing atonement, Kila, he finished the job. Vim loy Kippur, if he didn't bring the atonement, he left out a service. Loy Kila, he didn't finish the job. Divri Rabbi Akiva. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda said, you reversed the pasuk. You said Kippur, Kila. If you did the kapara, then you finished it. Why don't you just say the drasha simply? In Kila, if you finished the job correctly, Kippur, then you brought atonement. Vim loy Kila, but if you didn't finish the job correctly, loy Kippur, you did not bring atonement. Both of them really hold. If let's say the Kohen Gadol forgot one of the services, he didn't, let's say, put the blood on the kapiris for the goat or the par, like also like the service didn't do anything because there's no kapara. You have to do the service 100% correctly. So it seems that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva are saying the same thing. Va'amrinam, we say my bainayu. What's the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva? So Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, they had a machlokes. Chadam once said, "Mashmaus darshin ikabanayim." The both just tried to darsh the pasuk the same way. Different. One said you say the word keeper first, and then chila. One said kila first, and then keeper. But basically the same idea that if you forget one of the sprinklings, the service is invalid. You didn't bring atonement. And the Chadama, one said there is a difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda. Shirayim akvi ike benayu. That the question is, what is the service that if you leave out, it's wrong? The question is that if you leave out the shirayim, pouring the blood down the drain, if you forgot to do it at all, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's okay. Because the fact is, in Kippur, if you did the sprinklings of the blood on the Kodesh Kodashim and the curtains on the Mizbeah, Kila, you finished the job. Then loy Kippur, if you didn't do the sprinklings, loy Kila, you didn't finish the job. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, in Kila, you have to do the job entirely, even pouring blood down the drain. That's also part of the service. So basically, what the Gemara proved from this brisa, that Rabbi Yehuda had an opinion and was very firm in his opinion that you can't view pouring blood down the drain as a non-service. It is a service. And therefore, you can't divide and add of you, Rab Nechemia, to say the service of the Shirayim is order doesn't matter. Now the Gemara says, just one last question. Did Rabbi Yochanan say this? Did Rabbi Yochanan say, Rabbi Yochanan said on top of the page that according to Rab Nechemia, the order does not matter by the Shirayim, by pouring the blood down the drain. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said earlier. So the Gemara says you can't say that because Rabbi Yochanan said somewhere else that according to Rabbi Nechemia, if you did not do pouring the blood down the drain, the whole thing is invalid. Rabbi Yochanan said, Tana Rabbi Nechemia taught us, the Tana of Rabbi Nechemia is Kidivrei ha'oim shirayim akvi. Rabbi Nechemia aligns himself with the opinion that the pouring the blood down the drain is a very important service. If you leave it out, then the whole service is invalid. So just like Rabbi Yochanan said that if you leave the pouring the blood down the drain, the whole service is invalid, Rabbi Yochanan would hold that according to Rabbi Nechemia, the order of doing the pouring the blood is important, just as important as doing any other service with the white clothing. So therefore, how could it's like a question Rabbi Yochanan against himself? How could Rabbi Yochanan's viewpoint to Rabbi Nechemia to teach you that Rabbi Nechemia's viewpoint is Shirayim is not important? Here we see that Rabbi Yochanan said that according to Rabbi Nechemia, Shirayim, pouring the blood down the drain, is very important. Kasha, that's a very important question, and the Gemara leaves that as a difficulty. So before we do one more piece, let's just one more piece of Gemara, and then we'll finish. The Gemara just got through saying, just to remember, that the Mishnah said that order is important. From the Mishnah's plain meaning, every service of the Yom Kippur has to be done in precise order the whole day. But Rabbi Yehuda limits it and says, no, order is important only in the Kodesh Kedoshim. And Rabbi Nechemia said, order is important, whether it's in the Kodesh Kedoshim, whether you're doing the service in the Heichel, as long as you're wearing white clothing, order is important, except one service wearing the white clothing is not so important. And that is pouring the blood down the drain. If you did something prior to that, even though you're supposed to do it as soon as he walks out from the Heichel carrying the mixture of the par, you're supposed to pour it down the drain. If you did another service before it, that's okay. New Gemara, new piece, just to finish it off. Amar Rab Chanina. Rab Chanina said, Ketores, shechafnu kodesh chitasei shel par. The ketores that you dug it out before the shechting of the par. Now, remember, first, remember the service. Let's go to the service again. First, you slaughtered the cow, right? Then you gave the blood to a guy, a shtaidu guy, which means a guy, another kohen who stood there just mixing the blood. He just mixed the blood. Then the kohen gadol, after slaughtering the cow and giving over the blood to someone else, would scoop out the ketores. So if you did that, if you scooped out the ketores before slaughtering the par, then that's no good. You have to redo the service. You first have to slaughter the cow and then scoop out the ketores, prepare the ketores to go inside the Kodesh Kedoshim. So this is a service that's done on the outside the building, outside by the Mizbeach, right, in the Azara. So come on, who did Rabbi Chanina say this statement? So the Gemara says, the loik Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda just told you that order is important only dealing services in the Kodesh Kedoshim, but this is a service outside the Kodesh Kedoshim, so order is not important. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. But according to Rabbi Chanina, if you did the ketores before the sechting of the par, it's as if you didn't do anything. So he must not hold like Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda. He could even hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Since the service that you're doing of the ketores and slaughtering of the cow is so that you could bring the blood, is that so that you could bring the ketores into the Kodesh Kedoshim, so it's as if it is considered a service performed in the Kodesh Kedoshim. So there, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, order it matters, even though that part of the service is done outside the Kodesh Kedoshim. It's like Kodesh Kedoshim service because the whole point is to bring the blood of the cow or the ketores into the Kodesh Kedoshim. So he could say his opinion even according to Rabbi Yehuda. One more, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, our Mishnah said, the Kohen Gadol was, let's say, he's in the Kodesh Kedoshim, and he poured 4 bloods, right? He sprinkled 4 times. Nishpach Adam, or he's sloppy and klutzy, and the blood spilled out. So then the Mishnah says, what should he do? He has to walk out. I mean, it must have been so embarrassing. He walks out to the crowd and says, listen, I spilled the blood all over the Kodesh Kedoshim. I got to reslaughter a new cow. Yovi dam acher, he has to bring a new cow. Then he has to resprinkle again, go back into the Kodesh Kedoshim and then try it again. Then Isa, but if what you're saying is true, what do you mean? When you slaughter the cow, you're supposed to do the ketores again. You have to redo the ketores because the slaughtering of the cow, you did the ketores inside the Kodesh Kedoshim, and then you brought the blood into the Kodesh Kedoshim. But the Mishnah just says all you got to do is redo the cow. But if you do the cow, that means that you're doing the cow prior to doing the ketores. So how does that work? You have to slaughter the cow and then scoop out the ketores. And in this instance, you scooped out the ketores first and then slaughter the cow. So what does our Mishnah not tell you? That you have to redo the ketores? And says the Gemara, we just top one line on the page, the ketores loy kamairu. Of course, our Mishnah would agree you have to redo the ketores, but we're not talking about the ketores. The Mishnah's point is to tell you that if the Kohen Gadol was sloppy and he was in the middle of the service in the inside and spilled the blood, he has to redo the cow. But it goes without saying, in order to redo the cow, you have to redo the service of the ketores, because first you have to slaughter the cow, then you scoop the ketores and bring it inside. And that's the order. And because it's Kodesh Kedoshim service, it has to be done in precise order according to everyone. And this is where we end.
Shikoach.
You know, when I first started, I worked on Wall Street once at one time. And as a joke, but I don't know, my first Wall Street was wild. And my first lesson was that when a customer lost money and they called you and he would curse you out, right? And then the customer would curse you out and hang up the phone. But you, on the other side of the phone, they taught me, is first you hang up the phone and then you curse. Now, order isn't. That was my first lesson as a 22-year-old after business school. The first lesson: order is important. You know, the customer curses you out and hangs up the phone. Make sure before you say something to the customer, you hang the phone.
Hang up the phone.
And then shout the customer. It was just
good suggestion.
Yeah, but anyway,
all right.
That's okay. We finished out in the fascinating week this week.
Good Shabbos.